The ridge was holding its breath. 4 marksmen, 3 scopes, 2 conflicting calls. Fog slipped through the trees, too thick for certainty, too late for guesses. The target was still out there. The radios pulsed with static and hesitation. Orders stalled. No one had eyes. At the edge of the outpost, a woman marked support crew, adjusted her wind reading, checked the slope, and did not speak. She moved once, unlocked the backup rifle, and laid her cheek to the stock. 1 shot, 1 correction. The valley cleared. She was never cleared to fire. She was the only one who did. The ridge sat quiet beneath the climbing fog. Trees layered upward along the slope, bark slick with recent rain, needles darkened by early condensation. Midday sunlight had already faded to a dull wash beneath the cloud cover, making everything feel like late afternoon. The command tents buzzed below the overlook platform, their canvas edges snapping softly in the crosswind. Portable heaters clicked and hummed, muffled behind sealed flaps. A long table outside the ops tent was covered in laminated maps, heat charts, and water-resistant laptops. Rhea stood near the perimeter of the staging line, hands in her pockets, boots planted on the moss-covered rock where her weather node had been anchored since sunrise. The monitor showed a pressure drop she had already predicted, a steady southeast wind accelerating past forecast estimates. It was climbing faster than the model had allowed for, 12.4 knots sustained, drift potential increasing. She marked it on her notepad and folded the page down to save the corner. No one had asked for an update, but she'd logged it anyway. To her right, the marksmen were assembling at the forward overwatch perch. 4 men, all well-built, confident, all with rifles slung or propped against crates. They ran checks on elevation dials and scope calibration, speaking in shorthand only other range shooters would follow. Their voices were clipped and efficient. One of them, taller than the others and wearing a black compression shirt under his vest, gestured toward the wind chart Rhea had just folded. "Got Tier 2 speeds climbing again," he said. No surprise there. Drift's gonna cheat left. He didn't look in her direction, just tilted his head toward the general slope. Another man chuckled as he clicked the bolt on his rifle open, checked the chamber, and closed it again. Rhea stepped back toward the locked case near the edge of the gravel. Inside it, a long-range rifle lay untouched on the foam cutout, a backup system mounted to a portable tripod, rarely used unless a primary shooter failed or a second vector was needed. She had checked it this morning. It was clean. Chamber empty. Bolt loose. Oil settled at the action just as it should be. She wasn't on the roster to use it. 2 technicians walked by with coiled cable and a folded radar sheet, nodding at the shooters but not acknowledging her. One of them pointed toward the upper rise and muttered something about elevation instability. The other shook his head and said, "They'll probably just call it off, if it's like last time." Neither one looked up. Down at the command tent, a voice came through the mounted speaker grid. It was smooth, precise, broadcast through the operations net with full clarity. "All stations. Confirm visual telemetry. Heat trace was last confirmed at Grid Delta. Slope line 4. Suspected contact is armed. Maintain observation status until confirmation order." Another pause followed. "Tier 1 and Tier 3. Your primary eyes. We want shape, not shimmer. No guesses." The 4 men began spacing out along the viewing edge. One of them snapped a range card flat against his knee and used it as a shield against the fog glare. Another adjusted his gloves and crouched, bracing a scoped rifle against a rock shelf that had been reinforced with a shooting pad earlier that morning. Rhea tapped the side of her weather console. The display refreshed. 14.0 knots now. A spike. Direction holding steady, but gust rhythm tightening. She stepped back toward the comms relay station and keyed in a manual update. Wind drift, escalating. Requesting compensation grid shift by 2 degrees east. She watched the update send. No reply followed. From across the clearing, a junior officer leaned out of the side flap of the tent and called, "Support crew. Stay off the line unless telemetry goes unstable." His tone was not sharp, just official. the way someone might remind you not to block a doorway. Rhea nodded once and stepped back. Her badge hung loose from a gray lanyard. The plastic film on the ID clouded from age and field wear. It bumped softly against the zipper of her jacket as she moved. The name was legible. The clearance code beneath it was outdated. One of the shooters turned toward her briefly, then motioned to the rifle case without breaking stride. "Can you lock that down?" he asked. "Last thing we need is someone thinking it's in rotation." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned back toward his scope and settled into his perch. Rhea stepped forward and sealed the lid. The case clicked shut. Handle secured with a sliding bolt. The rifle would remain untouched. It hadn't been checked out. It didn't need to be. The fog had risen higher now. It licked the ankles of the men at the platform, diffusing their outlines like low smoke. They adjusted without comment, their scopes blinking faintly in the filtered light. Someone muttered about thermal noise. Another flicked a switch and cursed under his breath. Rhea turned toward her equipment crate and retrieved the folded weather log marked Tier 4. She tucked it beneath her arm and returned to her corner of the outpost. No one called her name. No one corrected her submission. The command post turned its attention back to the primary feed. Her station pulsed steady, 14.2 knots now. The wind had already shifted. The hill would follow. Rhea closed the cabin door behind her with a quiet push. The seal caught against the frame, soft and final. Outside, the wind moved steadily through the tree canopy, brushing the branches in long, even waves. She let the rhythm settle in her ears before she stepped forward, shrugging out of her jacket and hanging it on the hook by the window. Her boots left faint prints on the rubber mat, still damp from the ridge. The space was small. One cot, one desk, one chair, a kettle, a shelf of field manuals that had been opened and annotated more than once. Above the desk, a strip of corkboard held a line of paper overlays wind arcs, elevation tracings, sight lines between trees marked by hand and pencil. Each sheet was dated. Some were weeks old. Others were from this morning. She walked to the desk and picked up the folded log from the crate outside. It slid easily into the small drawer beneath her notebook. The cover was already marked in graphite. Tier 4 pattern confirmed. She did not turn on the overhead light. The gray afternoon still filtered through the side window well enough. She pulled the chair out and sat, resting her elbows on the edge of the desk. Fingers paused above the paper. The pencil waited beside the pad, sharpened that morning to a narrow point. She took it between her fingers and began a new arc, tracing gently along the top grid. 14.6 knots, gusts in bursts of 3, valley pull on the western slope. She curved the line downward and notched a single mark beside it. Her fingers moved automatically. The shapes formed without effort. It was not memorization. It was habit, rooted deep from years of watching movement where others scanned for color. She worked quietly, adjusting pressure only when the pencil drifted too far from the range contour. When she finished the loop, she dated the corner and set the pencil down. From the small shelf above her bed, she reached for a cloth bundle. The fabric was faded olive and folded twice, tied with a strip of twine. She laid it flat and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a cloth cleaning kit for a bolt-action rifle, tools aligned in neat rows, unused since her last field rotation. The brushes were still oiled. The bore guide hadn't rusted. She checked the tip of each swab, then folded the cloth again and returned it to the shelf. A thin folder rested beneath the kit. She pulled it forward and opened it with care. Inside were 2 documents. The first was an impact report from a training corridor near the northern hills dated 3 years ago, a confirmed hit from 800 meters. The printed acknowledgement bore her full name. It had been the last recorded round she'd fired for a live unit. The second sheet was older. It was a scanned page from a qualification trial. High score. Top 10%. The signature at the bottom was not hers. She closed the folder, slid it back beneath the kit, and let her hand rest a moment on the wood. Outside, a branch scraped gently against the cabin's side. The wind shifted again. She turned back to the desk and pulled down a new overlay from the corkboard. This one was blank except for grid lines. She aligned it over the fresh arc she had just drawn and began a second curve, steeper, offset slightly by terrain memory. She had walked that stretch the first week she arrived, not logged officially, just observation. She knew the way shadows moved there, the way a rifle barrel would disappear if braced against the trunk of a particular pine at a certain hour. She paused her hand and looked out the window. The trees were moving slowly now, uniform. There was no sharpness in their sway, only the steady drag of persistent crosswind. She let her eyes follow a single branch as it dipped and recovered. No birds in sight, no ground rustle, no movement except the wind. She picked up her pencil again and marked the overlay with a short note. Potential position, blindside angle, hold time 30 seconds. Beneath the overlays was an old diagram of a sniper rifle frame. The barrel and scope were outlined cleanly in black ink. She had annotated the margins with torque values and thread depth, spacing tolerances and cold weather calibration ranges. Some were corrections, some were reminders. She ran her thumb along the lower edge where the paper had started to fray. To the left of the diagram, clipped under a small magnet, was a faded marksmanship ribbon. Its colors had dulled over time, but the stitching remained tight. It had belonged to her father. She had kept it through every posting, though she had never worn it herself. It stayed on the wall, just above eye level, just close enough to see but never close enough to hold. The kettle clicked softly as the heating coil finished its cycle. She poured water into a metal cup and let it sit, untouched. The scent of heated plastic and steel filled the small cabin. She returned to the desk and made one final note in the corner of the overlay. Rise angle at 100.0 meters. Line of sight confirmed. She reached into her jacket pocket and retrieved a folded card, blank on one side, data charted on the other. She copied 2 wind adjustments into the margin of the overlay and checked the pencil's edge. Still sharp. No one had seen her draw this line. No one would ask her why it curved the way it did. She pinned the new sheet to the corkboard. It overlapped the others, but only slightly. The paper settled under the pins without resistance. The trees outside moved again, not sharply, just enough. Rhea turned back to the cup, lifted it, then set it down again without drinking. Her hand returned to the desk, fingers resting beside the next clean page. There was still more to measure. Fog began rising faster than forecast. It crept up the slope in slow, steady swells, folding itself between tree trunks and sweeping over the moss-covered ground. The sun had dropped behind a bank of clouds, and the light on the ridge turned flat. There were no long shadows now, only a uniform gray that softened every outline until distance meant almost nothing. On the ridge, the men spread out, spacing themselves between stumps and stone, each one focused through a different lens. Tier 1, I've got movement at West Branch. Could be a silhouette, said one voice over the open channel. Negative, another replied. Sharper. That's wind shear on the pine line. No heat signature. Don't jump. Static crackled, then went quiet. Another voice followed, lower and more measured. Let's confirm before anyone squeezes. Comms are soft, echoes bouncing. Near the edge of the overlook, one of the men adjusted his rifle position and brought the scope tighter into his shoulder. His finger hovered near the trigger guard, resting without pressure. Rhea watched from her post. She hadn't moved since the last adjustment on her weather console. It still blinked green. 14.6 knots. Fog level increasing. No direct visibility below the tree canopy. Tier 3. I've got a flicker southeast quadrant. Elevation 92. Came another call. That's an old mark. Tree shadow. Recheck your grid. The voice of command filtered through again. Still composed, but clipped. All stations hold. Suspect is still confirmed armed. One warning shot fired may escalate engagement. Repeat. Hold, unless target verified by 2 scopes. There was a pause. Then a soft thud echoed across the ridge. It came from the far end of the line, a shot deliberate, but slightly off. "Who fired?" a voice demanded. "Tier 4, came a sheepish reply. "Sorry, I had movement. I thought." "You thought wrong," someone muttered over him. Command responded immediately. "Tier 4, confirm miss, impact zone. Negative hit, target not verified, adjusting." Rhea turned back to her console. She touched the corner of her folded map but didn't open it. She already knew what it said. That area, the one the false shot aimed toward, had been ruled out in her first diagram. Too open, too vulnerable. No one would hold position there for more than a minute. The fog coiled tightly now, hugging low branches, wrapping tree trunks in pale shrouds. The team's scopes began flickering. The thermal overlays washed out. "I've lost shape," one man said. "Movement just stopped. No hold. I've got flicker again at 2 o'clock. Could be repositioning." "No way. That's outside his coverage. He wouldn't risk moving west." Rhea stayed quiet. She scanned the far slope through her own optics. No heat trace, no shimmer. But she didn't need it. Her eyes moved branch to branch, tree line to slope line. One patch, just above the fern break near a fallen tree, hadn't shifted all morning. Not a single branch had trembled. No birds had landed. Not one breeze had caught that angle. That stillness wasn't natural. She reached for her notebook and turned to the earlier page. She had marked it with a faint X at 100.0 meters elevation, west of the slope crest, inside a notch where 2 ridgelines overlapped. Now that spot flicked once. It wasn't a movement, just an absence. Something behind the brush didn't match the rhythm of the rest of the forest, where fog should have passed through. It paused, like it had struck resistance. The voice on comms grew more tense. "Command, we're out of sync. Grid is unreadable. We've got 3 calls on different angles." "Hold position," came the reply. "Visibility dropping. We don't have a clear path. Nothing triangulates." "Then cancel it," said one voice. "Call it off." "We don't call it off. The sniper's still out there." "Then tell us where he is." Silence followed. Then another line opened. All stations reset scopes. Begin visual sweep. Rhea didn't move. Her pencil hovered over the log, then pressed into the margin beside the original mark. She underlined the elevation and added one small note contour break. Unnatural pause. The rifles around her began to shift. The men moved behind their scopes, adjusting, refocusing, sweeping wide arcs that caught every flicker except the one that mattered. A wind gust passed over the ridge, curling low into the trees. The fabric of one shooter's hood fluttered. Leaves rustled. The forest whispered, but that one patch remained still. Too still. She folded the page, set the notebook aside, and looked once more through her optics. This time, she saw it. Just barely one slight rise and fall, a shadow-breaking rhythm. A sniper at rest would move like that. Not to scan, not to aim, but to breathe. She reached down, touched the rifle key at the bottom of her bag, and left it where it was. The comms filled again. Still nothing. Running out of light. "We're exposed up here." Command tried to speak, but the line stuttered. Static flared. Then silence. Rhea adjusted her scope again, not for closer range, but for clarity. The target hadn't left. He had never moved. Everyone else had. Rhea stood at the edge of the platform, fog curling around her boots in slow, shifting ribbons. The tree line below blurred at the edges, softened by mist that rose in long breaths from the forest floor. Her hands rested on the locked rifle case, fingertips already finding the familiar grooves in the latches. The metal was cool and slightly damp. Light pooled against the curved surface, a dull glow in the gray daylight. Voices rose and fell behind her, tangled in the comms traffic bleeding from the command trailer. Grid angles clashed, scopes disagreed. One man called left, another called west. A third said nothing. Everyone was watching. No one saw. She slid the key from her vest pocket. The small steel edge caught for just a moment in the lock, then turned smoothly. The case opened with a quiet click. Inside, the rifle lay nested in foam, bolt action gleaming under the shallow light. It was already zeroed. Rhea had confirmed it herself that morning, even though no one had asked her to. She lifted the rifle with both hands, careful not to rush. The weight settled naturally against her body. Her movement was quiet, deliberate, no wasted effort, no second glances. She knelt behind the mount and checked the bipod placement. The gravel under her knees pressed through the fabric of her pants. She shifted once to center her weight, then pulled the wind chart from beneath the padding and smoothed it against the ammo tin beside her. 14.6 knots, gusts rising, pulled to the left by 1/4 inch at 600 meters. She didn't need to write it down. She had already adjusted. She chambered around. The soft click of the bolt closing echoed once and then faded. Her gloves lay beside her, untouched. She preferred bare hands. More feel. Better control. Rhea adjusted the scope by hand. 2 turns to tighten the focus. A half click right. Elevation confirmed. The view stabilized. She breathed once through her nose and let it settle in her chest. The fog lifted slightly from the far edge of the valley. The tree line came into better focus, not sharp, but clear enough to read form. The patch she had marked was still there, motionless. But something had changed. A shimmer, almost invisible, hovered near the notch between branches. Not heat, not movement, just a shift in the pattern, a broken rhythm. Her eye traced the line of bark, followed the slope of the ridge. There, a glass edge, catching light, a lens, just for a second. She adjusted the angle of her cheek on the stock. Her breath came slow and measured. 1 second, 2, no more corrections. She already had it. The air stilled. She squeezed the trigger. The shot broke like a whisper, clean and tight. The suppressed round snapped through the fog and vanished into the trees. The recoil settled into her shoulder, firm but balanced. The rifle stayed level. Her body did not shift. Her eye did not flinch. The valley went silent. No shout, no alarm, just the soft hum of wind returning between leaves and pine. One figure in the command trailer spoke after 3 long seconds. "Confirm impact." Silence held. "Then we have confirmation. Target down. Repeat. Target neutralized. Who took the shot?" No answer came. Rhea pulled the bolt back, ejected the casing, and let it fall beside her boot. It landed softly on the gravel. The metal still held warmth. She did not stand. Not yet. She closed the scope cover and lowered the rifle gently into the case, locking it again with the same smooth motion. The latches clicked into place. She picked up the folded wind chart, slid it back into her vest, and retrieved her gloves. As she rose, the fog moved past her once more, brushing the edge of her sleeve. It thinned just enough for the overlook to open beneath her, the trees below calm again, the ridge at peace. She turned and walked back to her station. She did not look back. Behind her, the comms scrambled, logs updated, names were checked, no authorization appeared. But the shot had landed. That was enough. The ridge held its silence for 5 full seconds after the shot. Then the wind picked up again, brushing the tops of the trees and scattering mist across the overlook. The men closest to the edge were the first to shift. One of them turned his head slightly, blinking against the fog, eyes still pressed behind his scope. Another stood and stepped away from his rifle, letting the barrel tilt downward with a confused expression. None of them had moved before the shot. None of them had called the mark. In the command trailer, voices rose at once. "Impact confirmed. Repeat. Impact confirmed. Who's on the log?" Tier 1 didn't fire. Tier 3 just reported visual no shot taken. Tier 4. Negative. Rifle untouched. The lead officer stepped toward the central monitor. The screen flashed twice, updating telemetry. A blinking dot marked the impact zone just west of the upper tree line. The shape overlay vanished. Target signature gone. Confirmed hit. "Where did that come from?" the officer asked, not to anyone in particular. The technician at the back table tapped rapidly on the log terminal. His eyes moved between columns. He narrowed the query field, filtered for heat trace, then sorted by impact signature. Only one platform registered. It wasn't on the active file. "Sir," he said, hesitating, "that came from platform 9. The officer looked over. 9's not active. It just logged 1 round. Timestamp matches the shot. The officer's brow furrowed. Who was assigned to 9? The technician checked again. Nobody. It was marked support only. Rifle wasn't cleared. They turned to the side screen and pulled up the visual feed. A slight waver of fog moved across the platform. No one stood there. Just the case closed. The bipod adjusted. Nothing out of place. But someone had been there. One of the shooters walked up to the trailer door and leaned inside. "We didn't shoot," he said. "None of us." But the shot was good. A second followed him. Quieter. Someone's rifle was zeroed right. That was not luck. "Pull the casings," the officer said. "Now." 2 junior techs ran up the slope to the Overwatch station. They returned 4 minutes later, breathless. One held a small plastic bag in his gloved hand. "Found this at 9, still warm." The casing was marked clean. Factory round. No degradation. Fired from the backup rifle no one had used in months. The label on the casing confirmed the load. 1 round, 600 meters. Suppressed. The officer looked at the bag, then back to the tech. No name. Not yet. At the edge of the clearing, Rhea sat at her original weather post, checking the wind reading on her console. The green light blinked steadily. 14.8 knots. Direction had shifted slightly. She made a small note in the margin of her logbook, then closed it. The pencil rested neatly against the page edge. She didn't look toward the commotion. Her hands stayed calm. Her jacket was zipped up again. The rifle case was no longer in reach. She didn't explain. She didn't avoid. A junior comm officer stepped out of the tent and paused halfway between her station and the trailer. He looked in her direction. He watched her for a moment. Then he turned back, saying nothing. Inside the trailer, the logs continued to scroll. Still no authorization. No terminal login. No targeting code submitted. Someone bypassed the fire control relay. They didn't bypass it, the technician said, almost under his breath. They didn't need to. The platform was already zeroed. The officer exhaled. That means they knew the angle, wind, distance, everything. The technician nodded slowly. That was experience, not accident. Someone checked the mission roster again. Rhea's name appeared at the bottom of the support list, without a station number. Her call sign was blank. The officer tapped the screen once, then stepped back. A third shooter approached from the field. "If you figure out who it was," he said, "remind them they saved us 5 minutes of guessing and one more mistake." Nobody laughed. Nobody objected. The casing stayed on the table in the sealed bag. No one touched it. Back at her post, Rhea slid the notebook into her satchel, secured the strap, and stood. She walked to the edge of her platform and looked once toward the line of trees. The fog had thinned. Light pressed through the canopy in narrow bands. The valley looked still again. She didn't wait for questions. She didn't need to. Behind her, the command trailer quieted. The logs were still open. The official report hadn't been written, but everyone knew. The shot had landed, and it had not come from any of the men. The fog lifted slowly that evening, peeled away from the trees like breath released after a long hold. The air turned cooler, but not harsh. Distant branches swayed in rhythm again, no longer masked by mist or tension. The ridge had softened. Movement returned in the smallest ways, a bird landing quietly on the far side of the comm tower, the low creak of a panel resetting against its hinges. No alarms, no speeches, just quiet. Rhea sat on the edge of her bunk, coat already on, notebook balanced on her knee. The last line she wrote was small but precise, centered at the bottom of the final page. Wind steady, impact true. She pressed the pencil's edge beneath the sentence and drew one faint mark across the corner. A habit, one she always used when the entry wasn't just recorded, but finished. She closed the notebook. pressed the cover flat with her palm, and wrapped the elastic band around the center. The surface was smudged from repeated handling, the corners soft. In pencil, just beneath the ridge label, she had written a single word: held. She stood and slid the notebook into the inside pocket of her coat. The zipper moved smoothly, the fabric catching only once where the stitching had loosened. Her boots were already laced. Her bag rested by the door, packed the same way it had been when she arrived. The rifle case had been returned to storage. No one had touched it since. Outside, the last of the daylight stretched long across the slope. A few of the men moved along the path near the comm trailer, some with gear slung over their shoulders, others with nothing in their hands. One passed her on the way back from the upper post, a junior marksman, barely older than 20. Rifle still strapped tight. He met her eyes, nodded once, and kept walking. No smile, no words, just acknowledgement. That was enough. The new board went up in the Overwatch trailer just before nightfall. A junior technician slid the clear panel into place, secured the magnets, and posted the revised roster under the main heading. The column labeled Primary had 5 names now. Rhea's was the last one. No announcement followed. The change didn't need one. Inside the operations tent, the final log entry for the day remained unsigned. The impact confirmation showed the timestamp, trajectory, and coordinates. A red box at the bottom read, Shooter ID unregistered. Below it, someone had typed in a placeholder, entry reviewed, source credible. Her name was never typed. Later that night, 2 officers lingered near the perimeter after the lights dimmed. One of them asked who cleared Platform 9. The other didn't answer. He just looked toward the tree line, then said, "Doesn't matter now." Rhea didn't stay to hear that part. She had already walked the ridgeline once more, noting the way the breeze had shifted against the north slope. It was back to normal gusts, soft, direction steady, no drag through the lower branches. She knew it would hold through the night. Back in her cabin, she unpacked nothing. The kit remained sealed. The rifle diagram stayed folded beneath the bedroll. The pencil was returned to the cup on her desk. She washed her hands, rinsed her face, and turned the overhead light off before she sat again. Outside, the wind moved gently through the leaves. She didn't leave anything behind except the record. Not in the logs, not in the report, but in the pattern of silence that followed. No one questioned the shot anymore. No one called it in. It had landed. That was all it needed to do. By morning, new units would rotate in. The roster would change again. Files would be archived, but the board wouldn't be wiped. Her name would stay on it. Not loud, not underlined, just permanent. The ridge didn't know ceremony. It remembered in other ways. In the wind patterns filed by hand, in the slight curve of a pencil-marked range, in the list that used to stop at 4. Rhea sat quietly as the night settled. The light from the window thinned, then faded altogether. She leaned back, eyes closed, one hand resting on the front of her coat where the notebook lay. There was nothing left to write. The story had already held. Sometimes the most decisive person in the room is the one no one sees. Rhea was not chosen, not asked, not even considered. Yet when everything failed, she stepped forward, not for recognition, but because she knew what had to be done. She didn't argue. She didn't wait. She simply saw clearly and acted with quiet certainty. Her strength was not in shouting to be heard, but in holding her place until the moment spoke for her. This story reminds us that real worth does not depend on rank or attention. It lives in preparation, in restraint, and in knowing who you are when no one is watching. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Who around you holds that same quiet strength? Share your thoughts in the comments and follow for more stories that honor the ones who never ask to be seen but are unforgettable once they are.